Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Migraine Miracle, a sugar-free, gluten-free, ancestral diet to reduce inflammation and relieve your headaches for good. By Josh Turknett, M.D. Contributions by Jenny Turknett. Narrated by Mike Chamberlain. Publisher's Note: this audiobook includes bonus material. Please visit Tantor.com and type The Migraine Miracle into the search box. Follow the link to the book's page. Then, under the Supplemental Content section, please enter the access code MIRACLE and then click the Unlock button to access the bonus material. The code should be entered in all lowercase letters. All figures and recipes referenced in this audiobook can be found in the bonus material. This publication is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information in regard to the subject matter covered. It is sold with the understanding that the publisher is not engaged in rendering psychological, financial, legal, or other professional services. If expert assistance or counseling is needed, the services of a competent professional should be sought. Introduction. I hate migraines. No, really. I don't mean I hate getting migraines. It goes way deeper than that. I hate everything about them. I've spent most of my life hating them, in fact. Growing up, I hated them because my mom had them. Hers were ferocious and frequent, and I couldn't understand it. One day she'd be fine. The next, she'd be fixing dinner or washing clothes, face pale and eyes squinting, trying her best to conceal from me and my brother the agony inside. She was never one to complain, never one to put her needs above those of our family. But I always knew, no matter how hard she tried to hide it, I could read her face as well as she could read mine. And I hated whatever could do this to her. These migraines, as she called them. I desperately wanted to help, but I knew deep down there was nothing I could do. She was the smartest person I knew, as knowledgeable about migraines as any doctor. If she couldn't tame this beast, then I certainly had no chance. Still, I would often dream of finding the answer, of one day making the discovery that could destroy it once and for all. When I began getting migraines as a kid, I hated them with renewed vigor. I still vividly remember my first one. Nobody forgets his or her first visit from the beast. I was 11 at the time, on an overnight trip with my school class. It was a trip I'd looked forward to all year long, but barely had a chance to enjoy. Had I not seen my mom suffer with her migraines so many times, I probably would have thought I was dying. I remember the bus ride home, the sound of the other kids having the kind of fun only kids on a bus can have, while I sat curled up in the fetal position in my seat, wishing they'd just be quiet, shielding my eyes from the skull-piercing rays of sun coming through the window. I got home, vomited until there was nothing left, and passed out in a heap of exhaustion. My life with the beast had begun. My mother's struggle was now mine, too. Initially, my visits from the beast were few and far between, but as I got older, they came more often. By my 30s, I'd accepted migraines as an inevitable part of life. For as long as I lived, the beast would always be lurking nearby, ready to pounce after the slightest misstep. This was my fate, and I had accepted it. Migraines still remain a family affair. As luck would have it, my wife also has them. Like my mom, she usually soldiers on in spite of them, sacrificing her own comfort for the sake of others. This means she knows what it's like to teach a room full of second graders with her head pounding, each tiny voice a cannonball crashing against her eardrum. She knows what it's like to twice spend the entire first trimester of pregnancy with migraines virtually every day, refusing to take so much as a single Tylenol. This kind of struggle takes its toll, though. It was hard enough for me to watch someone I loved go through it the first time around. And when my daughter, at less than a year old, began having sudden episodes of intense vomiting, I wanted to believe it was just some odd stomach bug. But I knew better. I've known the beast long enough to recognize its many disguises. So it came as no surprise the first time she came up to me at age 5 with tears in her eyes and said, "Daddy, my head hurts." She was, of course, doomed by her DNA. Still, I didn't expect it to come so soon, though deep down I wasn't really surprised. I knew all too well that the beast shows no mercy. So perhaps now you understand just what I mean when I say that I hate migraines. And perhaps it makes sense that I chose a career in neurology, the field of medicine that treats disorders of the brain, and thus bestowed myself with the task of treating migraine sufferers, or migraineurs. When I entered the field, there was a part of me that hoped it would provide me the opportunity to find the answer that could help my family, myself, and my patients cure their migraines and rid their lives of the beast. I learned everything I could about them from whatever and whomever: textbooks, journals, my teachers, and my patients. In spite of this, the ultimate cure remained elusive. But through these efforts, I was at least satisfied in knowing I was providing my patients with every available tool for treating their migraines. It wasn't a perfect solution, in many cases far from it, but it was the best modern medicine had to offer. Or so I thought. Ultimately, I had come to the same conclusion my mother had years ago. The beast could not be killed. At best, it could be managed. But then it happened. In what seemed like the blink of an eye, everything changed. My migraine battle was over, and it happened by accident. Without intending to, I made the astonishing discovery that has completely transformed my life, that has completely transformed the lives of thousands of others, and that will completely transform yours. It is the discovery that will allow me to fulfill the promise I made to myself as a child so many years ago. My promise to kill the beast. At long last, I've found its weakness and the tool to exploit it, and I can't wait to share it with you. Chapter 1. The Nature of the Beast. Let's begin our discussion of migraines with a true account of one of my patients. The case of Margaret T. Margaret T., an accountant in her late 30s, is usually fastidious about her appearance. Normally, she doesn't dare leave the house without makeup on, much less without taking a brush to her hair. But this isn't a normal morning. After having debated doing so multiple times during the past month, she finally drives herself to the local hospital, only to spend 5 agonizing hours under the harsh fluorescent lights of the emergency department's waiting room in order to earn less than 5 minutes with a doctor. To make matters worse, she leaves in basically the same shape she had come. Before she departs, a nurse hands her discharge paperwork with instructions to follow up the next day with a neurologist. This is the paper she hands to me when I walk into my exam room the following morning. "Looks like you've been having headaches," I say. "Yes, and they're awful," she replies. "Can you tell me about them?" "I get this pain, sometimes a dull ache in my forehead, but then it turns into this pounding pain in my left temple and around my eye." "How long have you had them?" "They started about a month ago." "Have you ever had headaches like this before?" "Well, yeah, I've had headaches before. I get sinus headaches sometimes, and sometimes I might get one from stress, but those are nothing like this." "What do you mean by that?" "Well, I've never had headaches this bad before, or this often. Usually I get a headache and I can take an Advil or some Tylenol, and it'll go away after a while. But nothing seems to touch these." "Nothing at all?" "Excedrin helps a little bit, but I have to take it all the time." "How often are you taking it?" "Every 4 hours." "You mean every 4 hours for the past month?" "Yeah, pretty much." "Yikes. Do you have any other symptoms with these headaches? Are you particularly sensitive to bright lights or sounds?" "Oh, yeah. I have to lie down in a dark room, and I can't stand for anyone to talk to me. I've also gotten really sick to my stomach a couple of times and thrown up." Margaret hands me a copy of the brain MRI taken in the ER, clearly bracing herself for terrible news. This scenario is one that plays out in my office almost daily, and the conversation almost always travels along a similar path. Even for those who are well accustomed to migraines, visits from the beast can be frightening. For those who've never been visited before, their initial encounters with it are thought to surely signal the beginning of the end. But fear and anxiety usually turn to relief and even jubilation when they hear that not only are they going to be okay, but that, with a little effort, this beast can be conquered and destroyed. Defeating the beast requires that we first understand its true nature. And when it comes to the nature of a migraine, misconceptions abound, both among the lay public and in the healthcare community. In this chapter, I'll cover just what a migraine is and is not. Pain without a purpose? It's almost impossible for anyone to understand what it's like to have a full-blown migraine without actually experiencing it for him or herself. And when you do experience your first full-blown migraine, it's almost impossible to believe that something isn't terribly wrong inside your head. After all, pain is supposed to mean something, right? It's supposed to signal that something has gone wrong inside your body so that you can then do something to fix it. When you step on a nail and your foot hurts, it's your brain's way of saying, "Hey, buddy, get that sharp thing out of our foot before we get a raging infection or bleed to death." So a blinding pain inside your head must mean the same thing. Surely something terrible has happened in there. A rapidly expanding brain tumor, perhaps? A voracious brain-eating tapeworm? A ruptured cerebral aneurysm? Or 3? Well, not quite. While those things can, and do, cause bad headaches on rare occasions, okay, maybe not the tapeworm, usually the cause isn't quite so exotic. This leaves me as a doctor in the difficult position of having to reassure my patients that, in this particular case, horrific pain occurred for no good reason. In this case, the pain wasn't a sign of something terrible happening inside their heads. And when they glance at me suspiciously, while silently wondering whether I received my medical degree by mail order, I completely understand. Yet, that's what I tell them. A migraine is not the sign of a sick brain. It is simply a process, a sequence of stereotyped physiological events that unfolds inside of otherwise normal, healthy brains. It's a mechanism that may result in a wide variety of symptoms, the most memorable of which is usually fierce, violent pain. But it's a mechanism that can be triggered inside anyone's brain, an extremely odd but normal physiologic reaction that occurs in response to specific triggers. Just a masochistic little glitch inside our brains, I say. It's a hard sell. Trust me, I know. The masochistic little glitch. A migraine is most easily understood as a process in the brain, a cascade of events that, once triggered, may result in a huge variety of symptoms, including numbness, tingling, visual disturbances, nausea, vomiting, dizziness, fatigue, and headache, a rich cornucopia of pain and suffering. This idea of a process unfolding inside our body in response to a specific trigger is a concept with which we're very familiar, as this kind of thing occurs inside of us all the time. Take the case of a fever, for example. When our body is invaded by a microorganism, it is first recognized by ever-vigilant white blood cells whose job it is to detect intruders inside the body. This initial moment of recognition triggers a complex chain of events, one of which is the release of substances that raise our body temperature. Consider the swallowing reflex. When a bolus of food hits the nerve endings that supply the back of our throat, it generates a nerve impulse. That impulse then travels to the base of the brain, where it activates a highly orchestrated sequence of muscle contractions that propels food into the esophagus. Both of these are responses we'd all consider to be part of normal physiology. Likewise, when the threshold for triggering a migraine headache is reached and the migraine switch is flipped, The sequence of events is set in motion in the brain, the result of which can be a wide variety of symptoms, including, most notably, a throbbing headache. And though every last detail of this process is not entirely known, we've come quite a way in recent years toward understanding how it all happens. It's a complicated sequence with great potential for variation that has resulted in a good bit of confusion. The Glitch, Part 1. The Prodrome. The migraine process may be set in motion anytime from 4 to 48 hours before the actual pain starts, beginning with what is known as the prodrome. Not everyone experiences prodromal symptoms, and even those who do may only recognize their prodromal symptoms in retrospect. The most common symptom of a migraine prodrome is fatigue. In some, the fatigue can be overwhelming, and many may experience an overwhelming urge to sleep. Other reported prodromal symptoms include alterations in mood, irritability, depression, euphoria, food cravings, dizziness, diarrhea, constipation, and increased or decreased urination. The Glitch, Part 2. The Aura. For many, the pain of a migraine is also preceded by an aura, a sometimes frightening but always temporary neurological disturbance that warns of an impending migraine headache. Auras are a sign that the migraine sequence has begun, that the beast has been roused and is on its way. Auras may take many forms. In fact, virtually every type of neurological disturbance imaginable has been reported as a migraine aura. Visual disturbances are most common, followed by disturbances in sensation, numbness or tingling in the arm or face, for example. But, among other things, temporary disruption in speech, weakness in a limb, double vision, vertigo, or even complete quadriplegia have all been known to occur. The hallmark, though, is that these deficits in neurological function are always temporary, usually resolving after a period of about 20 to 45 minutes. The experience of an aura, particularly the first one ever, can be terrifying. Not surprisingly, many folks worry that they are having a stroke, and, in fact, are commonly misdiagnosed by doctors as having almost had one, that is, a TIA, or mini-stroke. Back in 1941, a clever psychophysiologist and migraineur, K.S. Lashley, made a pretty remarkable discovery, and he did it simply through thoughtful observation and analysis of his own migraine aura. Prior to his headaches, Lashley would see what is known as a scintillating scotoma, a gradually expanding blind spot surrounded by crescent-shaped scintillations of light. This is, perhaps, the most common of all migraine auras. This shimmering blind spot starts out small, gradually enlarging in a predictable manner until it often ends up occupying half the field of vision. Using his knowledge of how the visual system is organized in the brain in combination with the observations of his own aura, Lashley reasoned that whatever process was occurring in his visual cortex to produce this particular phenomenon was spreading through the brain at a rate of 2 to 3 millimeters per minute. In 1944, a PhD student at Harvard by the name of Aristides Leon made his own intriguing observation that seemed closely connected to what Lashley had described. Leon was studying brain electrophysiology using rabbits as subjects. What he found was that if he stimulated a rabbit's brain in any manner of ways, electrically, mechanically, chemically, he could elicit an expanding wave of depressed brain activity that spread outwardly from the point of stimulation. He calculated the speed at which this wave spread, and guess what answer he came up with? 2 to 3 millimeters per minute, the exact same rate that Lashley had calculated in relation to his own migraine aura. That surely seemed like more than a coincidence. Leon's experiment has since been replicated multiple times in multiple species. It's a physiologic response that, for reasons that aren't entirely clear, appears to be widespread in the animal kingdom, though we seem to be the only species in which it can be elicited without someone poking around in our brains. In recent years, we've developed technology that allows us to see this wave of depressed brain activity in real time during the aura phase of a migraineur, again always spreading at about the same speed that both Lashley and Leon described. We now know that this wave of spreading depression in the brain is what causes the symptoms of a migraine aura. Most often, it starts in the back part of the brain where visual signals are processed. This is why the most common migraine auras are visual in nature: flickering blobs, colorful fireworks displays, distorted objects, and the like. However, if other parts of the brain are affected by this wave of spreading depression, then different neurologic symptoms will occur. If the wave begins in the part of the brain that receives sensory signals from the skin, for example, then the aura may be a feeling of tingling and numbness on one side of the body. If it begins in the area of the brain controlling movement, the aura will be experienced as weakness in the arm or leg, or possibly even as problems with speech. Since virtually any part of the brain's cerebral cortex can be affected by this wave, virtually any type of neurological symptom may occur during a migraine aura. Not everyone experiences auras with their migraines. Some folks may have one with every migraine, some may experience them occasionally, and some may never have them at all. Interestingly, however, it has been shown that at least in some migraineurs, this wave of depression occurs without resulting in the subjective experience of an aura. Based on this finding, it is thought that perhaps there is some critical level of depressed activity that must be reached before the aura symptoms will actually occur. Thus, it is not entirely clear if this wave of spreading depression is a necessary feature of all migraines, either with or without the actual experience of aura symptoms. Now we know a little bit more about all those funny symptoms that can precede a migraine. Fortunately, they're a lot less scary than they may at first seem. But we still haven't talked about why migraines hurt so badly. The Glitch, Part 3. The Pain. The brain itself has no nerve endings, so it can't feel pain. I know, during a migraine it feels like your brain is hurting. But that's just a convincing illusion. In that case, then, where does the pain come from? As it turns out, the surface of the brain is covered by several layers of connective tissue known as the meninges, which are entirely capable of sensing pain. It was once thought that the pain of a migraine was caused by dilated blood vessels inside this tissue. This was based on the observation that, after the wave of spreading depression ends, there's a temporary surge in blood flow to the brain, a surge made possible by expansion of the brain's blood vessels. It stood to reason, then, that it was this expansion of the blood vessels that was the source of the pain. More recent observations, however, show that the vessel expansion has long resolved even while the pain persists, and as such isn't likely the primary source of migraine pain. Today, the prevailing theory is that the brain itself, or more specifically, the brain stem, is the primary generator of migraine pain. The brain stem sits at the base of the brain, forming the juncture between the brain and spinal cord. Normally, the brain stem is the receiver of pain signals. Pain-sensing nerve endings inside the meninges transmit nerve impulses from the meningeal tissue to the brain stem, which then sends it along to other brain regions that ultimately register it as pain. This is how an infection in the meninges, that is, meningitis, leads to a headache, for example. In a bizarre twist, during a migraine, the signal direction is reversed. The nerve impulse starts in the brain stem and travels out to the meninges. This reversal of the normal nerve impulse direction is technically referred to as antidromic conduction, meaning opposite of normal, and is thought to be a critical early step in the generation of migraine pain. Once that nerve impulse reaches the meninges, several different chemicals are released from the tip of the nerve: substance P, neurokinin A, and calcitonin gene-related peptide, in case you're interested. Among other things, these chemicals cause dilation of the meningeal blood vessels, spillage of protein from the blood vessels into the meninges, and meningeal inflammation. This inflammation then activates the pain-sensing nerve terminals in the meninges that then transmit the pain signal back to the brainstem. Did you get that? The brainstem actually initiates the very signal that it ultimately receives back and senses as pain. If this sounds like a vicious, masochistic cycle, that's because it is. And this cycle continues, usually escalating in intensity until it finally burns out or something comes along to break it, like medication or a good night's rest. The Glitch, Part 4. The Hangover. Anyone who has ever had a migraine knows that things don't just suddenly revert back to normal once the pain is gone. The brain and the body needs a little time to recuperate from the vicious sequence of events it just experienced. This period of recovery is typically referred to as the postdrome. Like the prodrome, fatigue or generalized weakness is the most common symptom reported. Some may also complain of brain fog, or a feeling that they're just not thinking clearly. In addition, many migraineurs experience exquisite sensitivity in their scalp after the headache has subsided. The bristles of a comb may feel like tiny little needles raking across their skin. All of these symptoms can last up to a full day after the pain has subsided. But why? What I've described thus far is, in a nutshell, the migraine process as we currently understand it. I started by saying that migraines are just a physiologic reaction to certain triggers, just like a fever or swallowing. But there's just one little problem with this analogy. Unlike a migraine, a fever and swallowing both have a purpose. Fever is our body's way of trying to destroy invading microorganisms with heat. And swallowing, of course, delivers food to the gastrointestinal tract for digestion. But what about a migraine? Spreading neuronal depression, antidromic conduction, sterile inflammation. Why does this complex, highly orchestrated process happen at all? The truth is that nobody knows for sure. I have my own suspicions, which we'll discuss in Chapter 4. First, let's talk about how we even arrive at a diagnosis of migraine. Making the diagnosis. There's no blood test, X-ray, or MRI scan that can diagnose your headache as a migraine. Despite all of the advances we've made in modern medicine, a migraine is still diagnosed the old-fashioned way, with a good patient history. In other words, the diagnosis rests on how you describe your headaches to your doctor. Sometimes blood tests and brain scans are performed as part of the evaluation for headaches, but this is only to exclude other, more exotic causes of headaches. These tests themselves can't actually diagnose a migraine. So just what headache characteristics are considered diagnostic of migraines? According to the strict guidelines set by the International Headache Society, migraines can only be officially diagnosed if you've had at least 5 headaches that meet the following 3 criteria. 1. The headache must last a minimum of 4 hours. 2. The headache must have at least 2 of the following 4 characteristics. A unilateral location, that is on one side of the head, a pulsating quality, moderate to severe intensity, aggravated by physical activity. 3. The headache must be accompanied by at least one of the 2 following symptoms: nausea and or vomiting, sensitivity to light, photophobia, or sound, phonophobia. These features describe a migraine in its most classic, fully expressed form. The good thing about these criteria is that if your headache meets all of them, then chances are extremely high that you're having migraines. With criteria this strict and specific, the prospect of diagnosing a headache as a migraine when it is really something else is very unlikely. The problem with criteria so strict and specific, however, is that rigid adherence to them would also mean underdiagnosing migraines by a large margin. In fact, I'd argue that if only those fulfilling these criteria were diagnosed with migraine, we'd be diagnosing the majority of migraine sufferers with something else. And without a correct diagnosis, we can't hope to provide proper treatment. The beast in sheep's clothing.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?